So you'll see that I even haven't used Edge, which is the default browser that comes with Windows. So it's giving me this startup screen to say if I want to sign in, but I don't want to do that. I'm just going to start without my data. And basically, I don't want to use any services. It's going to go with the system default for the theme. And that's all I want to do. You see it's in Dutch because of me being in Netherlands. This basically means reject the cookie policy. And now I can actually change it to English, although there's no option for my country to be English. So I'm just going to change it to, let's make it the United Kingdom. All right. So it's a bit of a pity that I don't get news in English. And you see it's still showing my location as being in Netherlands. So a bit strange, that experience. But the first thing I normally do is I download a different browser. I generally download Chrome. So I go to Google Chrome and I download it and install it. You can see there is the installer. It asks me if I would like to make changes to this, so I'll say yes. And I'll let it install. You see it's still giving me Dutch. There's a way to change that once I've got it installed. All right, and then Chrome's also asking me if I'd like to log in. I'm just going to say I don't want to log in. And there we go, we have Chrome installed. So I can now close Edge. I already unpinned it earlier, didn't show you that. And I can remove Edge from the desktop if I ever want to use it again. Install VLC, but I don't normally launch it directly, so I'm also going to remove that shortcut. And from here, I can then start downloading all the different things that I want to install. Now, I still like doing this, downloading them directly, because I'm then in full control of how things get installed. I installed OBS and VLC with Winget, but sometimes when you install things with Winget, it doesn't add things that you might expect. It might install in a different location, or it might not give you the options you want. So the first thing I'm going to install is actually Git for Windows. Actually, first, let me just change the language. So if I go into the settings and I search for language, that doesn't work because it's in Dutch. So I'm going to put Taal. And you see I can choose the 3 different languages. There's Dutch, United States English, and a different English. So I'm just going to I think I'll choose United States English, and then I can remove Dutch. I'm going to restart. Now you see if I search for language now, it's we get that same experience. I'm not sure why there's 2 different Englishes, but this should be fine. Okay, I don't go to this website, I go to the main Git website. And from there I get the one for my architecture. So I'm running a 64-bit computer. If you don't know that already, you can see that from the system information, system configuration, control panel, those kind of things. I'm just going to go to the control panel. And this is the default view that you see, but I like to say either large icons or small icons so I can see everything. Let's do large icons because it might be more visible. And from here you can then see system. And these days it opens actually the settings app in Windows 11. And you can see more information about your computer. So you can see here the 64-bit operating system, x64 based processor. And you can see the processor it has, and so on. So you can see here's the device name. I call it Grateful because it's a nice reminder to be grateful every day. And you see I'm running Windows 11 Pro. That's the version of Windows that's installed at the moment and the specific build. Okay, so that should be familiar with most people, but in case you didn't know that, now you know. So I'm going to download Git, which is a source control system that allows us to keep track of source code and basically text files and a history of files that we make changes to. It allows us to version the files that we have in our repositories. So if you ever need to go back in time to an older version, or maybe you make a mistake you would like to undo, or you need to go back to an older version to just update that specific one, Git becomes very useful for that. And I like to install it first because most tools built on top of that. Actually, I'm also going to install Visual Studio Code first, because I do know that there is some settings that the Git installer might actually pick up if we install other tools first. So I'm going to download Visual Studio Code. And if you go to the website, this is Visual Studio Code, which is an IDE, an integrated development environment. So what we would build our software in. There's a stable build and a insiders build. Insiders has the most recent features, but it's not necessarily stable. I like stability, so that's the one I'm going to download. While that downloads, there's also then Windows Terminal. So if it's not already on your computer, you can get to the GitHub website for Windows Terminal. And it's basically a new command prompt from Microsoft, basically. So you can run command line tools in a nicer experience. So sometimes it's not installed by default in Windows, but in this case it is. So if I open it, I can go to this menu here, see about. That's the current version that is there. And on the GitHub page, you can see the releases. So if I just compare the two, it's already the latest version, so my Windows update would have installed that for me. All right. So that's Windows Terminal. It's already on the system. I'm going to install Visual Studio Code. I just use the default location. And then I do add these options to add a right-click menu, basically, to let me open with Visual Studio Code and to make it a default editor. Adding to path basically allows me to run code from the command line because it's then available on the path. Okay, I'll let that finish. And I'll launch Visual Studio Code. Now, the first time you launch it, you get all of this, this nice workflow of or wizard if you're not familiar with it. I am quite familiar with it, so I'm not going to go through this all. I see here, for example, it shows you that it's going to collect some usage data so you can learn how to opt out. So I'm just going to turn that off. That's a setting that you can update. And you can see you can choose different themes. You can install more themes later. You can click see more themes, and then there's various ones. Basically tries to guide you through the different features it has. If you type Control-Shift-P, it opens the command palette where you can type some commands like open folder. Also shows you the shortcut keys for that. Control-K, then Control-O. It says view toggle, so let's see that. So you can toggle things in the view. Like if I wanted it to be full screen, you can see I can press F11 or use the command palette. And then it just explains all the different features. I do recommend actually going through all of this because it does give you some tips and tricks, and you start getting used to how you can become more effective in Visual Studio Code, like for example using multi-cursor editing. So I recommend reading through all of this. I've done it kind of in the past. Probably should do it every now and then because there's always new features being added. But for now I'm just going to click through to show you things. So for example, here's the terminal. There's a shortcut for that as well. You say open terminal. It is, let's just say terminal. You can see there's a whole lot of different options. Create terminals, Control-Shift till backtick. But Control backtick is also just going to toggle the terminal. So you say terminal, new terminal. Now I've got two different terminals that I can switch between inside Visual Studio Code. And I can then delete, kill those processes. That's quite convenient. You don't have to switch between Windows Terminal and Visual Studio Code. You can just do it inline. There's lots of different extensions. So depending on your project that you might open, you'll get different recommended extensions. I don't have anything open right now, but you can see that there's popular extensions of various different things. We'll get to that later. And that's from this sidebar. So we'll see later more of that. We saw one setting earlier to opt out of telemetry. If you press Control-Common, it opens the settings editor, and for now it's the user settings. So I can then change settings later if I'd like to. So if I want the, let's see, the font, maybe I wanted to change the font, I could change it here. Or the default font size, I can make it smaller or bigger. All right. And then, yeah, go watch the tutorial. Installing Git is what I'm going to do next. And that's basically the tool. So next time I open Visual Studio Code, it's going to open this page on Startup. I can then click quickly, open a folder, maybe open a specific walkthrough to learn those fundamentals again. But you can also just make it not show this on Startup. So you get like an empty window when you open up Visual Studio Code. I like that experience because I'm familiar with it enough these days. All right, so I'm just going to close that for now and then press Control-J to get to my downloads. And then I'm finished with VS Code, so I'm going to install Git. Again, just the default location, and sometimes I just like to review these different settings, especially ones that say new. So for example, this one, add a Git Bash profile to Windows Terminal. I'm going to do that. So then when I open Windows Terminal, the moment you can see when I click, yeah, I get profiles or PowerShell, command prompt, and Azure Cloud Shell, which I never use, so I don't know what that's really for. Checking this option will give me a Git Bash profile. So that's why I installed Windows Terminal, to make sure it was installed at least before I install Git. Okay, I am familiar with Vim. So for the default editor for entering kind of commit messages and that kind of thing, I like to use Vim. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code for now because I think it'll be harder for most people to be comfortable with Vim. But this is obviously up to you. So I'm going to try that out. I actually never really use it myself, so it could be nice for me. And then I like to use main as my default branch name. And then the rest I basically go with the recommended options. Okay, this option is actually new to me. I think these days Windows has OpenSSH. So it might be that I don't need to use the bundled one, but I'm just going to use the default for now. It might be better to use this option, but I'm just going to go with the defaults. Okay, in this case, again, just the defaults. This is when it comes to using like HTTPS, SSL. It says here, for example, using your company's internal certificates. If you're working at an enterprise, perhaps this would be a better option, but I'm just going to go with this for now. And I think the rest of the defaults are fine. And then let it install. And while it's installing, I'm just going to actually pin VS Code to the taskbar. I prefer adding stuff to the taskbar. Like the Microsoft Store, I generally don't go to, so I unpin that. And these other buttons and things you can hide later. But yeah, for now, I'm just going to launch Git Bash. So you see, this is actually Bash. So it's a different shell. It's from like the Linux kind of style. So instead of saying dir, you would say ls to list files in a directory. So if you're familiar with Linux or Bash, it's generally quite nice, but I prefer to use it in Windows Terminal. So if I go here, I can now open Git Bash, Windows Terminal. And as you can see, it's kind of a Linux kind of style. So the forward slashes instead of the backslashes in Windows. Even though this is a Windows location, it's just kind of a style of Linux. So I can say ls/c, and that's what's on my C drive. So if I wanted to go to the C folder, I can do that. Make a directory, repos or repositories, and then yeah, start from there. So I'm actually going to make a directory called programming from scratch. And you see, sometimes things that I'm used to are not there in Bash. So what I like to do is I like to say alias. Yeah. So then I can use more Windows familiar commands. One thing though is if I then open up a new shell, lost. So those that are familiar with Bash, you can create a, it's called Bash profile. Always forget which one's which. You can put your aliases there. I have a couple that I tend to use quite often. And then you can say source, Bash profile. Now that's in my user directory, which is identified by this tilde. So it's actually tilde slash dot bash profile. And now I should be able to say that alias. When I open up a new window, I then have it available for me, which is quite nice. It's loaded from my profile. And then finally in the settings of Windows Terminal, I then make it my default profile, and you can also then choose some other settings. So in Git Bash, I don't like to start in my user profile folder. I prefer to actually start in maybe the repos one. I spend most of my time in Git repositories. Generally, I want to start from that folder. So that's just a little tip. So I'm going to save those changes. Now, if I open up Windows Terminal, you can also press Windows key and X for X-ray, and you get this little menu. You see Windows Terminal for administrators. Just going to open the normal one, and you see that it's a bit of a nicer way to open it. And the administrator one, if I open that one, it asks for permission to run as administrator. And you see a similar experience here. I can see I'm running as administrator, which is quite useful. So I also like to just pin Windows Terminal to the taskbar. All right, so that's basically quite a few things we've installed as a good basis to get started. We have Windows Terminal, so I can go to my repos quite easily. This is not a Git repo yet. If I say Git init, now it's a repository. You see it's created this Git folder. You don't need to really know much about that. You see as well, it's showing me that this is the branch that I'm on. So that's quite cool. I can start Visual Studio Code from there if I'd like to. And I trust this repository because I've created it. And I mean, if I really want to, I could even get rid of this Windows Terminal and then open up a terminal here. You see it's still PowerShell. If I press Control-Shift-P and I say default terminal, like it is default profile. It's a similar thing. So the default profile, there's a Git Bash profile. So if I close this and I just reopen the terminal, there we go. I've got the same thing. So that's a very nice experience. So now I can create a new file. I'm just going to call this readme.md, which is a Markdown file. Which is basically just a way of creating a text document, which then is got this markup, these different ways of marking what things are. This is a heading, and then this might be a list of things. Or you might have a subheading, with a different kind of list. You might have nested elements, or you might even have code blocks. So code block, and this is a code block for JavaScript. Or maybe you want a code block for C#. And so on. If I click this button on the side, you see it's got like a little magnifying glass. It's going to preview that, and I get a nice experience of what this Markdown file is going to be rendered up as. And so it's a nice way to document things. And it also updates in real time. You see here, for example, as well, that the numbered lists, it doesn't have to have the exact number. You can just use one for everything, and Markdown will figure out the numbers for you, which is sometimes nice. You don't have to renumber things as you move them around. So if I moved that to be the step 4, then that's done. Okay, so that's quite nice, because what I could do is say install, let's say set up your environment, install below. Git for Windows, Visual Studio Code. So the order we actually did was like this. And now that I've got that, I can use Git to then see my changes. See, these are untracked files. I can add that to my Git repository. I can see that now it's actually got this change to be committed to my repository. And I could say git commit. But first, I need to configure who I am with Git. So when you install Git, there's this Git GUI as well. So if you go actually into the start menu and you say all apps, and then you just try find the Git folder, you see there's different ones: Git Bash, Git CMD, Git GUI. We've seen Git Bash, Git CMD is the same thing, but using the command line, Windows command line. So Git is on the path. And then Git GUI is in a graphical user interface. So you can also open an existing repository. And then get a more graphical user interface to do stuff with. You can see here, there's these staged changes. You can see that these are new lined because they got this plus there being added to the repository. When we change things, we'll see a different kind of experience. And you can also, from here, you can go to edit options, and you can give your username. And there's a whole lot of other options that you can set. When you save that, then you should be able to, actually, I think if I go back to the settings here, this is for all repositories. And this is just for the specific repository. So I set that for basically the whole system, the global settings. And you see my specific repository I can also customize. So if I wanted to say just James, then that would be the case. If I actually say here, git config list. And then search for user, and I see that it picks up these settings. These are coming from global, and this is coming from local. So let me try it again. So you see it's opened my editor, which is Visual Studio Code, and now I can edit the commit message. So I'm just going to say this is the initial commit. Save the file. When I close it, you see then Git has committed my change. Let's say Git status, there's nothing to commit. And let's say Git log, you can see there's my initial commit. I can then go and update this file. This repository is intended to be a knowledge sharing resource. I plan to help others learn how to program scratch, starting with the real basics, moving into the details of, such as installing such as using and installing, using a computer and installing software, moving into the details of how computers work, computers and software work. Eventually, we create our own software, such as games, perhaps. So now you get the same experience as well in Visual Studio Code. It's a bit nicer to use for those that aren't familiar with the command line. You can see here there's a difference of the files. The file that we had before, that's in the repository, and the file that we have right now with the change. So it's only adding these lines. Click this button, I can open the file, and I can say, okay, maybe I wanted this to be installed in order to develop software. We will install the below tools. Right, now if I go back, you see these have been added, and this one's been removed. So this one changed so much that it basically said, okay, this isn't a change, it's basically this file got removed, or this whole line got removed. Not actually the whole line, just this part, this was kept. See, it's still here. Kind of. It's highlighted differently where it was changed. Here, this was completely inserted, but this was changed. And yeah, same here. Here, there was a new line added. That's why this one's showing as it was changed. You can see line 10 here. Here, there's 5 to 6. There's no line here. These become more familiar once you start working with source control systems. Okay, so now I can say updated the docs to include a summary and reworded. It's going to say and reworded. So it says there are no stage changes to commit. would you like to stage all your changes and commit them directly? I'm just going to say yes. All right, so then that's now staged and committed. If I go get status, we see there that it's in the history now. If I look at the history, you see the main branch is now at this version. If I want to go back to the previous version, I can then get this one. So let's git checkout with this commit. I don't have to type out the whole thing. I could just match a part of it. It needs to be long enough. Okay, and you see now I'm back to the older version. So you can see that I'm on that specific version. If I want to go about main again, back to the latest version. And I'm just going to change it one more time. Let's say we now want to learn a specific language. Let's say learning JavaScript. So I did forget that I installed Chrome. So I'm going to add here Google Chrome, because that is what we'll use a lot with developing JavaScript. Let's say ensure you already have a web browser installed, such as Google Chrome, as this allows us to easily start with JavaScript. Now you'll see now if I go to the source control diff, there's a difference here. As I git status, we can see that the changes are not staged for commit. Let's say git commit. You can say -n to give a message. Nothing changed. And from here you can see, okay, maybe I only want to add this part. I can select that. I can say stage selected ranges. Interesting. So now you see that I've got staged changes and changes. Click on here, it's only got this part. Click on here, it only has this part. It doesn't have that, the rest. And if we go to git status, I see a similar thing. These are changes to be committed. They've been staged. And changes that were not staged yet. If I also go to here and I say rescan, you see the same thing. So if I click on here, I can see the unstaged changes. Clicking on here, I can see the staged changes. These are what's going to commit. If I say added, forgot to include Google Chrome in desktop software, I can say commit. Now if I say git status, you see that the staging area has no longer got anything there. If I say git diff, get a difference. Or if I click on here to see the same difference. Or if I go here to rescan and I see the same difference. This is kind of my working area, and this is where I would stage things to be committed. That are not, this is things that I'm still working on. These are things that I'm ready to commit. So that's quite nice. It's also quite nice that you can do that with different files, but also different parts of a file. So I don't really use Git GUI, but you can try and get familiar with it if you'd like. That's that for now. I'm just gonna then say added a section about learning JavaScript, because that's what we'll actually then do at some point. But for now, I need to stop recording. Don't worry if you don't understand everything I did. It'll come with time. If there's anything that you have questions about or have some suggestions for me, then feel free to let me know and give me a comment. Ciao for now.